Welcome to my channel, The World of Science Fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.
Neonic rivers reflected in puddles on cold metal. Rain mixed with technical dust lashed the platform, striking against surfaces with a persistent hiss. The downpour carried particles of industrial waste, leaving grimy residue on everything it touched. Everything except the elite guard standing motionless at the center of this chaos. Lyra stood like a statue amid the storm, her storm sky armor gleaming with flawless perfection. Water beaded and slid off the polished surface, never lingering, never staining. Each morning she calibrated the molecular repulsion fields with mechanical precision, a ritual that long ago had transcended mere maintenance to become something sacred. During those private moments, with her armor partially disassembled, she would trace her fingers over the dents and scorch marks hidden beneath the perfect exterior. Battle damage from the day her family died, preserved as a personal memorial. The public saw only the flawless surface. She alone knew the scars beneath. The pristine exterior wasn't vanity. It was a shield against a chaotic universe that had already taken everything from her once. If she could maintain perfect order in this one aspect of her life, perhaps she could prevent the rest from falling apart again. The Citadel space station was a monument to social stratification. Far above, in the upper rings, the gleaming residences of New Order officials caught the artificial sunlight, their windows never clouded by the perpetual precipitation engineered for the lower levels. The rain that constantly washed the loading docks wasn't a climate malfunction, but deliberate design, keeping the grime and the undesirables constantly moving, constantly uncomfortable, constantly reminded of their place. Across the platform, a New Order security officer shoved a thin child who had strayed too close to a restricted area. The child fell hard, skinning their palms on the metal deck. The officer didn't offer help, merely stood over the child, hand resting meaningfully on his weapon until the child's mother hurriedly pulled them away, eyes downcast, murmuring apologies. Lyra observed this interaction without comment or intervention. Rules existed for reasons. Order demanded enforcement. The alternative was chaos. A high-ranking official in an immaculate gray uniform passed by, flanked by personal security drones. He nodded to Lyra with the casual acknowledgement of someone recognizing a useful tool. She returned the gesture with military precision, a perfect angle of her head, nothing more. Moments later, a family of refugees huddled past, their clothes worn thin, their possessions reduced to what they could carry. A child stared at Lyra's gleaming armor with wide eyes. She ignored them completely. A shadow moved differently than the others, more purposeful, more furtive. Lyra's enhanced vision caught it immediately. A figure in a worn, heavy hood emerged from between stacks of cargo, moving quickly while clutching a small container against their chest. The figure darted between shadows, clearly avoiding the regular patrol patterns of security drones. A drone drifted unexpectedly into the hooded figure's path. The figure pivoted sharply, changing trajectory to avoid detection. In their haste, they miscalculated and their shoulder collided hard with Lyra's armored pauldron. The impact wasn't just a casual bump. As their bodies connected, something viscous from the container the stranger carried smeared against the pristine surface of Lyra's armor, leaving a sticky, barely visible impression from a biogel ampule hidden within. Lyra froze. Her gaze dropped to the stain on her perfect armor. Her reaction came with military precision. An energy blade materialized in her hand with a menacing hiss, its blue-white edge pressed against the stranger's throat before they could take another step. "Desecration," she said, her voice as cold as vacuum. The hooded figure didn't cower. Instead, challenging eyes glinted from beneath the hood. A man, perhaps 30, with a face hardened by years of survival. A thin scar traced his right cheekbone, and several days' stubble shadowed his jaw. "It's just lubricant, lady." "Not the end of the world," he rasped, his voice carrying a defiant edge despite the lethal weapon at his throat. "Filth is the beginning of chaos," Lyra replied, her voice tight with controlled rage. "And chaos is death." The man's eyes narrowed, not with fear, but with a surprising insight. "And I've seen where your precious order leads. To children starving because their paperwork isn't filed correctly. To medical supplies destroyed because they arrived on the wrong transport. Order requires sacrifices," Lyra countered, her blade unwavering. "Chaos demands them all." "Is that what they told you when they burned the outer colonies?" he asked softly. "That it was a necessary sacrifice for order?" Rain continued to fall around them, the drops sizzling against her energy blade. Neither moved. Her blade pressed against his throat, the stain marred her armor, and the station's artificial weather system continued its relentless cycle, indifferent to the life and death standoff playing out on the platform. A siren wailed suddenly, cutting through the steady patter of rain. Red emergency lights began to pulse across the platform. Lyra's helmet comm crackled with urgent chatter. "All units, perimeter breach on platforms 6 through 9. Unknown hostiles, heavy weapons. Protect the central." The transmission dissolved into static. The platform's main doors blew inward with a thunderous boom. Through the smoke and debris emerged figures in black armor without identification markings. But these were no ordinary mercenaries. They moved in perfect synchronization, their footfalls eerily silent despite their heavy equipment. They flowed across the platform like a single organism, splitting and reforming with practiced precision that spoke of extensive military training. Lyra's tactical eye noted the distinctive configuration of their weapons. MX-970 plasma disruptors, military-grade hardware with heat signatures masked by advanced dampening fields. The blast patterns they left on the walls weren't random destruction. Each shot cauterized as it destroyed, leaving no evidence behind. These were professional killers who specialized in leaving no witnesses, no evidence, just bodies that appeared to have died from catastrophic system failure rather than weapon fire. Cleaners, professionals with military precision. They fanned out across the platform, their weapons already firing, cutting down the station personnel with ruthless efficiency. Lyra, faithful to her duty, shoved the hooded man aside and spun to face the threat. Her energy shield activated with a snap hiss as she moved to intercept the attackers, her blade raised. To her surprise, the hooded man didn't flee. Instead, he pulled an old but well-maintained blaster from beneath his cloak and fired 3 rapid shots, dropping a cleaner who had been aiming at Lyra's back. "This way!" he shouted, grabbing her arm and pulling her toward a maintenance hatch as more cleaners poured onto the platform. Lyra hesitated for a split second. Duty demanded she stand and fight, but tactical sense told her they were hopelessly outnumbered. The decision was made when a heavy weapons specialist among the cleaners aimed a pulse cannon in their direction. She ducked through the hatch after the hooded man as the platform behind them erupted in explosive force. The blast wave propelled them forward into a dimly lit technical tunnel, the hatch slamming shut automatically as emergency protocols engaged. The sudden silence was almost as disorienting as the explosion had been. The maintenance tunnel stretched before them, illuminated only by emergency lights that flickered erratically, casting dancing shadows across rusted walls. The air was thick with the metallic scent of oxidation and the musty smell of recirculated moisture that had been trapped in these passages for years. Condensation dripped from overhead pipes, creating irregular, hollow echoes that masked the sounds of their pursuers. The sharp tang of ozone permeated everything, emanating from exposed wiring that occasionally sparked with residual current. Their footsteps echoed down the corridor, each sound seeming to multiply and return from unexpected directions. The acoustics of the tunnel created the unsettling illusion that they were being followed from multiple angles. Shadows stretched and contracted with the flickering emergency lights, sometimes appearing to move independently, like sentient hunters stalking the darkness. Against one wall, a faded banner hung in tatters, its royal insignia, a double star, barely visible beneath years of grime. Beside it, a child's doll with a guard uniform lay abandoned, its synthetic fabric deteriorating. These weren't just maintenance tunnels. People had lived here once, perhaps during the early construction of the station, or maybe as refugees during the uprising. Alarms continued to wail in the distance, their sound muffled by layers of metal and insulation. The station's automated voice echoed through the tunnels, distorted and fragmented. "Security breach in progress. All non-essential personnel evacuate to designated safe zones. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill." "Who are they?" the man asked as they paused at an intersection, his breath coming in controlled bursts. "Not pirates," Lyra replied, her tactical training assessing what she'd seen. "Too disciplined, too well-equipped. They're professionals." "They're butchers," he corrected, checking his blaster's charge. "They fired on civilians without warning." A distant explosion rattled the corridor, followed by the sound of boots on metal. The cleaners were in the maintenance system. "We need to move," Lyra said, her earlier animosity temporarily set aside in the face of immediate survival. They pushed deeper into the station's infrastructure, through cramped access tunnels where they had to proceed single file, their shoulders brushing against walls coated with years of grime. The further they went, the older and more decrepit the passageways became. Rust streaked the walls in patterns that resembled dried bloodstains, and moisture dripped from overhead pipes. In one narrow junction, they found evidence of hasty evacuation from years past. A child's stuffed animal, its synthetic fur discolored and stiff with age, lay abandoned in a corner. Nearby, a cracked hollow frame flickered with a corrupted image of a smiling family, their faces partially dissolved into digital noise. Lyra's eyes lingered on the image for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. The man Ryan, as he tersely introduced himself during their flight, noticed but said nothing. A soft, mechanical whirring suddenly filled the corridor. Ryan tensed, pulling Lyra into a recessed doorway. "Hunter-seekers," he whispered. "They've released maintenance drones reprogrammed for pursuit." Around the bend came 3 spherical drones, each the size of a fist, their optics glowing a malevolent red in the darkness. They moved with unnatural precision, scanning methodically as they advanced. "They're looking for heat signatures," Ryan murmured. "Your armor should mask yours, but mine. We'll lead them straight to us," Lyra finished. She assessed the situation rapidly. "Keep moving. I'll handle them." As Ryan continued down the corridor, Lyra waited until the drones were almost upon her. Then with lightning speed, she activated her blade and sliced through the lead drone. Before the others could react, she pivoted and caught the second with a precise thrust. The third drone began to emit a high-pitched alert signal, but her armored hand crushed it before the sound could propagate. She rejoined Ryan at a junction, the destroyed drones in her wake. "They'll send more when these fail to report," she said. "All the more reason to hurry," he replied, leading her deeper into the maze. The tunnel suddenly ended at a massive hermetic door, its surface scarred by decades of use and neglect. "Dead end," Lyra said, scanning for alternative routes. Ryan shook his head. "Not for me." He moved to what appeared to be a solid wall panel and pressed in a specific pattern. A narrow passage, almost invisible in the dim light, slid open. "Smuggler's route," he explained at her questioning look. "You learn the back doors or you don't survive long in my line of work." Before they could enter, a sudden crash echoed from the direction they had come. The cleaners were back on their trail. Ryan examined the hermetic door with new urgency. "This is even better. Through here, then we cut through my passage. 2-layer escape." Lyra assessed the door. Dual lock system, ancient. The security mechanism consisted of 2 distinct systems. A physical, mechanical lock with visible gears and tumblers exposed by corrosion, and a complex energy matrix that pulsed with erratic light, requiring biometric calibration. Ryan pulled a set of pics from his pocket. "I'll handle the mechanics," he said, dropping to one knee before the rusted mechanical components. "But the matrix requires perfect biometric calibration from your armor." Lyra frowned. "I can't calibrate and simultaneously monitor pressure in the servo drives." "You won't have to," Ryan replied, already working on the mechanical lock. "Listen to me. Place your palm on the panel. I'll tell you when and how hard to press." Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew louder, methodical footsteps and the occasional burst of communication. From an adjacent vent, 6 more hunter-seeker drones emerged, their optics immediately locking onto them. "Work fast," Lyra said, placing her armored hand on the glowing panel while drawing her blade with the other. "We have company." The panel hummed, recognizing the unique energy signature of her guard armor, but then flickered erratically. "It's unstable," she warned, feeling an uncomfortable tingling in her fingers as the ancient system attempted to interface with her armor's more modern technology. "Hold steady," Ryan instructed, his focus absolute as he manipulated a series of tension wires inside the mechanical lock. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the chill of the corridor. His tools scraped against corroded metal, producing a sound like tiny screams. The drones advanced in formation. Lyra couldn't release the panel without disrupting the calibration sequence, forcing her to defend one-handed. As the first drone lunged, she sliced it cleanly in half. The second and third attacked simultaneously from different angles. She parried one, but the other slipped past her guard, its cutting appendage scoring a line across her armor's leg plate. Hurry, she hissed, dispatching another drone with a quick thrust. What followed was an intense, almost intimate collaboration under extreme pressure. Ryan's rough hands, stained with lubricant and grime, worked the mechanical components with surprising precision. His movements were hampered by an unexpected complication. A locking pin had fused with its housing over decades of disuse. "Damn it," he muttered, applying more pressure to his pick. The tool bent dangerously. "There's a secondary failsafe, military grade." Meanwhile, Lyra's hand, encased in her perfect gauntlet, remained on the glowing panel, following his curt, exact commands while fighting against the system's increasingly erratic behavior. With her free hand, she continued to ward off the persistent drones, her movements growing more constrained as she balanced the dual demands of combat and calibration. "Now 3 pulses, increasing pressure," he instructed, his voice tight with concentration. Lyra complied, pressing her palm against the panel in a rhythmic pattern, feeling the resistance change as the system responded. Suddenly, the panel surged with energy, sending a painful feedback loop through her armor systems. "Matrix is destabilizing," she hissed through clenched teeth. "It's overloading my sensors." A drone slipped past her guard, attaching itself to her helmet and attempting to drill through. She slammed her head against the wall, crushing the machine, but sending a jolt through her entire body that nearly broke her connection with the calibration panel. Ryan glanced up, his eyes meeting hers for a brief moment of shared urgency. 2 more seconds, I almost have it." His pick slipped, slicing his finger. He ignored the blood, immediately reinserting the tool. "1 more," Ryan whispered, his entire body tensed with effort. "I can't maintain connection much longer," Lyra said, her disciplined voice finally showing signs of strain as the last 2 drones circled for a final attack. "Now!" Ryan shouted suddenly. "Full pressure, now!" Lyra slammed her palm against the panel with all her strength. The energy matrix flared blindingly bright, and for a terrifying moment, she thought the system had overloaded completely. Then Ryan's mechanical lock clicked into place, a series of ancient tumblers falling into sequence with a sound like distant music. The door shuddered and began to slide open with a protesting hiss of ancient hydraulics, just as the first cleaner rounded the corner behind them. Ryan fired twice over Lyra's shoulder, forcing the pursuer to take cover, buying them precious seconds to slip through the narrowly open door. Once they were through, Ryan slammed his hand against the emergency override, and the massive door groaned shut behind them. Seconds later, they heard the cleaners pounding on the other side, but the ancient barrier held. "This way," he said, immediately heading for his hidden passage. "They'll breach that door eventually." They found themselves in a dimly lit corridor, emergency lights casting everything in a dull red glow. The air was stale, smelling of dust and abandonment. Lyra turned to Ryan, her earlier contempt softened by a reluctant respect. "You know these systems well for a smuggler." Ryan's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "You'd be surprised what smugglers need to know to stay alive." He gestured down the corridor. "There's an old medical bay not far from here. We can regroup there, figure out our next move." They moved cautiously through the abandoned sector. Unlike the active parts of the station, this area bore the marks of hasty evacuation. Personal items still lay scattered, frozen in time since whatever emergency had forced the occupants to flee. Lyra noted the blast marks on some walls, evidence of the conflict that had reshaped the political landscape of their world. "The uprising reached even here," she murmured, her fingers tracing a scorch mark as they passed. Ryan glanced back at her. The uprising, or the brutal suppression that followed? Hard to tell which side fired which shot after all this time. Lyra's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. They had more immediate concerns than political disagreements. The abandoned medical bay was a ghost of its former functionality. Equipment lay covered in dust, examination tables stood at odd angles, and medications long expired filled the cabinets. A cracked illuminator still cast weak light through a broken window that overlooked an adjacent corridor. Ryan secured the door behind them, while Lyra moved to the window, using her helmet's enhanced vision to survey their surroundings. The cleaners were methodically searching the abandoned sector, moving from room to room with military precision. "They're not just mercenaries," she whispered, watching their coordinated movements. "They're eliminating witnesses." Ryan joined her at the window. "Witnesses to what?" Before she could answer, an explosion rocked the corridor outside. The cleaners had placed charges on a wall, creating a new path through the sector's maze-like structure. This was no ordinary breach charge. The explosion was catastrophic, designed not just to open a path, but to collapse surrounding structures. The blast wave shattered the already cracked window and sent a deadly shower of shrapnel into the medical bay. The ceiling above them groaned. Support beams, weakened by decades of neglect, and now by the concussive force of the explosion, began to fracture. A massive section of ceiling, complete with structural reinforcement bars and conduit bundles, tore free directly above Lyra. Ryan reacted instinctively, throwing himself at her with surprising speed for a wounded man. He shoved her clear of the collapsing structure, but couldn't escape himself. The massive section crashed down on him, pinning his lower body beneath tons of twisted metal and shattered composite materials. A jagged piece of metal rebar tore through his side in the process, embedding itself deep in his flesh. Blood immediately began pooling beneath him, spreading in an alarming crimson stain across the dusty floor. "Ryan!" Lyra scrambled to his side, assessing the damage with military precision. His face had gone chalk white, jaw clenched against the pain. "Not how I planned my day," he managed through gritted teeth. Lyra examined the debris pinning him. The main support beam across his legs weighed at least half a ton, far too heavy for normal human strength. "Don't move," she commanded, activating her armor's enhanced servo systems. She positioned herself beside the largest beam, feet braced against the floor. Her armor hummed as she diverted power to the exoskeletal enhancement circuits, a system designed for breaching operations and heavy combat. Warning indicators flashed across her helmet display. The damage calibration from the door lock earlier had compromised some functionality. "On 3, she said, gripping the beam. 1, 2, 3 exclamation mark. Her armor's servos whined in protest as she lifted, metal groaning against metal. The beam rose inch by agonizing inch. Ryan, despite the excruciating pain, dragged himself backward, leaving a smear of blood on the floor. With a final surge of effort that sent warning alarms blaring through her helmet, Lyra heaved the beam aside. The exertion proved too much for her damaged armor. As the beam crashed to the floor, something critical failed within her exoskeleton. Sparks erupted from her left shoulder joint, and her helmet's visor cracked from edge to edge, compromising her visual systems. The servos in her legs seized completely, locking her knees in position. Lyra staggered, suddenly unable to maintain her balance with the rigidity of her armor working against her. She collapsed beside Ryan, her systems blinking out one by one as power rerouted erratically through damaged circuits. "Your armor?" Ryan gasped, his own pain momentarily forgotten as he saw her predicament. "Critical failure," she managed, struggling to release her helmet's manual clasps with fingers that could barely move in the malfunctioning gauntlets. "Servo lockup." Despite his grievous wound, Ryan dragged himself to her side. His hands, steady despite the pain, found the emergency release catches at the sides of her helmet. Military models all have the same basic. The helmet hissed open, revealing her face fully for the first time. Pale, perspiring, eyes sharp with both pain and tactical assessment. "Release mechanism," he finished. He helped her disengage the primary armor lock, allowing her to move again. Though without the servo's assistance, the armor became a burden rather than an aid. She couldn't remove it completely. Not here, not now, but at least she could move. It crashed to the floor with a thunderous impact that surely alerted any nearby cleaners to their location. She dropped to her knees beside Ryan, her armor's power reserves dangerously depleted from the effort. He collapsed on his back, blood quickly soaking through his clothing from the wound in his side. The rebar had torn free when he moved, leaving a gaping injury that pulsed with fresh blood with each labored breath he took. "You're injured," Lyra stated, her own breathing heavy from exertion. "I'll manage," he rasped, but the spreading bloodstain told a different story. Lyra's gaze fell on a biogel ampule that had fallen from his container during the chaos, the same one that had left the stain on her armor. Her eyes fixed on her pristine gauntlet, then on his gaping wound, then on the ampule of illegal biogel. 1 second of silence. Through her cracked visor, her eyes revealed a battle more intense than any physical confrontation. Then, decisive movement. She snatched the ampule and broke the seal with a sharp twist. The sticky, pungent gel covered her gauntlets as she applied it to his wound. The viscous substance had a strange iridescence to it, unlike any medical gel she'd been trained to use. It clung to her armored fingers, defying the repulsion field that kept other substances from adhering to her pristine surface. Ryan's eyes widened in surprise. Didn't think you'd dirty your hands. For a smuggler, he managed, wincing as the gel made contact with torn flesh. I'm not doing it for a smuggler, she replied tersely. I'm doing it because it's necessary. The biogel began to work immediately, stemming the bleeding and beginning the cellular regeneration process. The pain in Ryan's expression eased slightly, though he remained dangerously pale. We need to move, Lyra said, listening to the sounds of the cleaners drawing closer. Can you stand? Ryan nodded, though it was more determination than certainty. With Lyra's help, he struggled to his feet, leaning heavily against her. Each movement clearly caused him immense pain, but he refused to make a sound. His jaw clenched tight, his breath coming in short, controlled bursts. There's a storage facility, 1 level down, he gasped. Rarely used. Good place to hide. Their roles reversed with unsettling swiftness. Now it was Ryan guiding them, his arm around Lyra's shoulders, as much for his support as to help her navigate with her malfunctioning armor. She could still walk, but the lock servos made each step awkward and loud. Her combat effectiveness was severely compromised. Left at the next junction, he whispered, his voice strained but steady. Then down the maintenance shaft. They made their way through service corridors and emergency shafts, Ryan growing weaker with each step despite the biogel's effects. Lyra struggling with her now cumbersome armor. By the time they reached the abandoned storage facility, they were both near collapse, leaning on each other in a fragile balance of mutual dependence. The vast room was filled with forgotten cargo containers and decommissioned equipment, creating a labyrinth of potential hiding places. They found a secluded corner formed by 2 large containers. Ryan checked Lyra's damaged armor with practiced hands, disengaging what components he could to ease her movement. She, in turn, examined his wound. The biogel had stopped the bleeding, but he had lost a dangerous amount of blood. Exhaustion claimed them both. Ryan lost consciousness first, his breathing shallow but steady. Lyra maintained her vigil as long as she could, her energy blade ready despite the armor failures, but eventually she too succumbed to the strain of the day's events. Hours later, a distant metallic crash jolted Lyra awake. The cleaners were in the storage sector, methodically searching. She checked her armor systems. Almost nothing functional. The life support and defensive systems had failed completely. Ryan stirred beside her, his eyes fluttering open. He took in their surroundings with the quick assessment of someone accustomed to waking up in unfamiliar places. Without a word, Lyra offered him her water flask. He took it with a shaky hand and drank deeply. Thank you, he said, his voice rough from dryness. You shielded me from the collapse, she replied, avoiding his gaze. That beam would have crushed me, armor and all. The cleaners' voices echoed in the distance, still several corridors away, but moving systematically closer. Ryan struggled to sit up, grimacing. Your armor's destroyed, he observed. Beyond repair, she confirmed, attempting to flex her hand in the malfunctioning gauntlet. Power core ruptured during the lift. He studied her face, now visible through the cracked visor she couldn't fully close. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Just another new order drone. No thought beyond the rulebook. Another crash, closer this time. The cleaners were making progress. Help me to that wall, Ryan said suddenly, nodding toward a panel of exposed conduits. I can give us a chance. Despite her skepticism, Lyra helped him to the wall. He leaned heavily against her, his face ashen but determined. Why did you join the elite guard? He asked as his fingers traced the conduit lines, searching for something. Lyra remained silent, listening for the pursuers, but Ryan persisted. Most of you are true believers. Fanatics. But you... He found what he was looking for, an access panel almost invisible beneath years of grime. You're different. The uprising, she finally said, her voice low. My family lived in the capital when the rebels attacked. Ryan worked at the panel, his hands steady despite his condition. I was there too. Different side of the barricades. This revelation startled her. You were a rebel? He laughed bitterly, then winced at the pain it caused. No. Royal Guard, 2nd Division, assigned to protect the city, not the palace. His fingers deftly rerouted wiring inside the panel. I followed every order, maintained perfect discipline. Until A power coupling sparked as he connected it, making Lyra flinch. Until, she prompted, surprised by her own curiosity. Until I was ordered to lock the Eastern Sector emergency doors. To maintain quarantine integrity. 2,000 civilians trapped inside with the fires. His voice became clinical, detached, as if reading a report. Official records called it a necessary tactical decision to prevent rebel advance. In reality, it was a sacrifice to buy the royal family time to evacuate. The story struck Lyra like a physical blow. The Eastern Sector, my family was there. Their eyes met in the dim light, the weight of shared history suddenly between them. I refused the order, Ryan said softly. Open the doors instead. Saved who I could. That's when I realized order was just another word for control. After the new regime took over, I deserted, found my way to the outer colonies, started moving things people needed but couldn't get legally. Lyra's tactical training urged her to dismiss his story as rebel propaganda, but something in his eyes, the same haunted look she sometimes glimpsed in her own reflection, made it impossible to disbelieve him. My father called me that morning, she found herself saying. Final year cadets weren't supposed to receive personal communications during tactical immersion training, but he had connections. He told me they could hear explosions in the distance. Ryan had managed to create a small trickle of water from the rerouted systems. He filtered it through a compact device from his pocket. He said not to worry, Lyra continued, watching him work, that the royal guards would hold the rebel forces back. His last words to me were, remember, Lyra, in chaos there is only death. In order, there is life. The connection cut off mid-sentence. The Eastern Sector communication hub was the first thing to go, Ryan said quietly. I'm sorry. He had created a crude adapter from parts in his kit. Connect this to your armor's emergency intake. It won't restore functionality, but it might give you enough power for basic defensive systems. As Lyra attached the adapter, Ryan continued working with the wall systems. There's a little girl named Seren in the orphanage on Sanctuary Moon, he said, his voice hardening. 8 years old. Both parents were dock workers who died when the station's atmospheric regulators malfunctioned during a worker protest. A distant metallic bang made them both tense, but the cleaners were still several sections away. She has respiratory damage from the gas exposure, Ryan continued. Without this gel, her lungs will continue to scar until she can't breathe anymore. His fingers traced the edge of his wound, where the gel was still working. Then there's Kai, 10 years old. Lost his arm when security forces opened fire on a crowd in Sector 17. The prosthetics they offered refugee children are outdated, painful models. The biogel helps his body accept a better neural interface we acquired. The biogel, Lyra said, watching her armor's power indicators flicker briefly to life. It's military grade, restricted. Yes, and twice as effective as anything civilians can access, Ryan replied, his eyes hard. The same gel that saved your fellow guards on a dozen battlefields. But apparently refugee children don't deserve the same chance at survival. Another crash, closer still. The cleaners' voices were now distinct enough to make out individual words. They're getting closer, Lyra warned. Ryan nodded. We need to move. There's an external cargo platform at the far end of this section. If we can reach it, there might be transport ships we can use. The cleaners will have secured all ships, Lyra countered. Not all of them. Ryan's mouth curved in the ghost of a smile. Some ships don't appear on official registries. They helped each other to their feet, each compensating for the other's weakness. Lyra's malfunctioning armor, Ryan's blood loss. Together they moved deeper into the storage facility, staying just ahead of their pursuers. The cleaners were thorough but predictable, following standard search patterns. Ryan seemed to anticipate their movements, guiding Lyra through blind spots in their sweep. Despite her compromised armor, her tactical training complemented his instinctive understanding of the space. They communicated with gestures and brief whispers, developing a wordless cooperation born of necessity. Finally, they reached the door to the external platform. Lyra placed her hand on the control panel, but nothing happened. Power's been cut to this section, she said. Ryan examined the door. Manual override. He pointed to a small panel near the floor. Help me. Together, they forced the manual crank, slowly opening the heavy door just enough to slip through. The external cargo platform stretched before them, open to space on one side, with only a shimmering containment field separating them from the void. The platform was partially decompressed, with air whistling through breaches in the station's hull. Wind howled through the gaps, creating an eerie, constant moan that seemed to carry the whispers of those who had died here during the uprising. Debris from the station's damaged sections orbited slowly beyond the containment field, casting strange shadows as they passed through the harsh light of the nearby sun. Beyond, stars gleamed cold and distant, surrounded by the wreckage of destroyed ships, evidence of the battle that had raged during the station's capture. At the far end of the platform sat an old cargo vessel, battered but potentially operational. Their only chance of escape. "That's our way out," Ryan said, his voice tight with pain and determination. "One of mine. Unmarked, unregistered." They made their way across the platform, alert for any sign of the cleaners. Lyra's damaged armor made stealth impossible, each step producing a harsh metallic sound as locked joints scraped against each other. "Get to the control console," Ryan instructed as they reached the ship. "You'll need to override the docking clamps. I'll cover you." Despite her damaged systems, Lyra's technical knowledge remained intact. She limped to the ship's external control panel and began working to hack the security systems. Her armor's interface was non-functional, forcing her to work manually with the unfamiliar civilian systems. "They're coming," Ryan warned, taking position behind a cargo container, his blaster ready. Multiple hostiles, heavy weapons. The door they had used burst open, and cleaners poured onto the platform. Ryan fired with remarkable precision despite his weakened state, dropping the lead cleaner with a shot to the helmet visor. "There are too many of them," Lyra called out as more cleaners advanced across the platform, using cargo containers as cover. "Focus on the override," Ryan shouted back, continuing to fire. His tactical experience showed in his shot selection, targeting exposed limbs, force multiplier points, and environmental hazards rather than attempting direct kills against armored opponents. "I need 5 more seconds," Lyra shouted, her fingers flying over the console despite her damaged gauntlets. Ryan's eyes narrowed, calculating. He spotted an unstable power coupling near a group of advancing cleaners. "I'll give you 10, he called back, then sprinted from cover. He fired 3 precise shots, not at the cleaners, but at the power coupling. The resulting explosion created a wall of flame and debris, temporarily blocking the attacker's line of sight. It was a deliberate tactical maneuver, not a desperate charge. The leader of the cleaners stepped through the flames, his black armor more elaborate than the others. He removed his helmet, revealing a face scarred by combat and age. His eyes were cold, calculating, the eyes of a man who had ordered countless deaths without remorse. Those eyes widened slightly as they fell on Lyra. "Lieutenant Terrace," he called out, his voice carrying across the platform with practiced command. "I thought your entire family burned in that uprising." Lyra froze, her fingers hovering over the console. How did he know her name? The man smiled, a cruel twist of lips. "You don't remember me. Commander Vex, Special Operations. My unit personally cleansed your sector. I remember your father. He died on his knees, begging for his family's lives." He tilted his head. Apparently he missed one. White-hot rage surged through Lyra, momentarily overwhelming her tactical training. Images flashed before her eyes. Her family home in flames. The official report claiming rebel responsibility. The years she'd spent blaming chaos for her loss. But this man's words rewrote history in an instant. It hadn't been rebels who murdered her family. It had been the very order she'd sworn to uphold. "Lyra!" Ryan's voice cut through her shock. "The third sequence. Input the variant code." His words snapped her back to the present. She recognized the tactical situation immediately. Without looking at the console, she entered a different override sequence than the one she'd been attempting. Vex aimed his weapon at Ryan. A guard protecting a smuggler? The New Order's standards have fallen. He fired, a precision shot that caught Ryan square in the chest, throwing him backward. He collapsed near Lyra, blood spreading rapidly across his clothing. The console before Lyra suddenly flashed green, the override complete. But instead of the docking clamps releasing, the platform's automated defense turrets activated, swiveling to target the cleaners. Ryan hadn't just been a smuggler. He'd been planning contingencies. With a cry of rage, Lyra abandoned the console and engaged the cleaners directly. Her energy blade, one of the few systems still functioning in her damaged armor, flashed as she cut through their ranks. Each strike was powered not by training, but by decades of misdirected grief now finding its true target. Despite her malfunctioning armor, her combat effectiveness was devastating. She used the armor's weight to her advantage, letting momentum carry her through strikes that would have been impossible with functioning servos. The cleaners, trained to fight opponents who move with predictable patterns, couldn't adapt to her improvised style. A heavy blast caught her side, damaging her armor further and sending her staggering back. Realizing the futility of continued fighting against superior numbers, she retreated to where Ryan lay, positioning herself between his body and the advancing cleaners. She activated her energy shield, the last functioning defensive system in her armor, trying to protect both of them. But her power reserves were depleting rapidly. She knelt beside Ryan, pulling his bleeding form close, trying to shield him with her body. In that moment, her damaged armor scanner, coming into contact with his blood and the residual biogel on her pauldron, began to malfunction. A message flashed across her cracked visor. Analysis, error, DNA match, royal lineage, identification, Prince Rhiannon, disbelief, denial, impossible. A memory surged unbidden, her father showing her a portrait in a book when she was a child. The young Prince Rhiannon smiling with the distinctive birthmark of the double star at the base of his neck. Remember this mark, Lyra, her father had said, his finger tracing the symbol. It's the sign of the royal line. One day it may be our only hope, our only way to recognize the true king if all else fails. But as she stared down at the wounded man in her arms, a wind gust from a hull breach tore his hood away. Light from an exploding fighter craft outside illuminated his neck, revealing a birthmark in the shape of a double star, the mark her father had described in childhood stories of the royal family. The mark all royal guardians were trained to recognize above all others. The royal regenerative biogel that only responded to royal DNA. His knowledge of forgotten systems, his compassion for the suffering, his refusal to trap civilians in the eastern sector. The lost prince had been living as a smuggler, fighting from the shadows to protect those the new regime had abandoned. Vex approached, weapon raised. Your shield won't save you, he sneered. Lyra rose silently, pushing Ryan's body behind her. She activated her energy shield, covering him. Her gaze fixed on the mercenaries contained such glacial fury that they involuntarily stepped back. This shield doesn't protect me, she declared, her voice ringing like tempered steel across the platform. It protects my king. The cleaners hesitated, confusion evident in their posture. Vex recovered first. The royal family is extinct. This man is nothing but a criminal. Look at his neck, Lyra commanded. The birthmark of the double star. Scan his DNA. This is Prince Rhiannon, rightful heir to the throne. Uncertainty rippled through the cleaners' ranks. Some lowered their weapons slightly. Two in the back ranks exchanged glances, one making a subtle gesture. The ancient royal salute that had been forbidden under the new regime. The contract doesn't change. Kill them both, Vex snarled, noticing the hesitation. Most raised their weapons again, but three broke formation, stepping backward. Sir, one said, protocol requires DNA verification before terminating royal bloodline targets. There is no royal bloodline, Vex roared. Only traitors and rebels. The platform shook violently. A massive explosion tore through the station's superstructure. Through the containment field, Lyra saw a fleet of ships dropping out of hyperspace, old military vessels bearing the insignia of the outer colonies. The Union, Ryan gasped from behind her, a smile breaking through his pain. Right on schedule. Vex's face contorted with rage. Open fire, he commanded, but several of his troops were already retreating. The ones who remained aimed their weapons, but precision shots from beyond the platform struck two of them squarely in the chest. Chaos erupted as Union forces breached multiple points on the station simultaneously. The cleaners found themselves caught in crossfire, their carefully planned operation unraveling. Vex, realizing the situation was lost, locked eyes with Lyra one last time. This isn't over, Terrace. The throne stays empty. He threw a detonator that released an impenetrable smokescreen. When it cleared, Vex was gone. Union forces secured the platform. Lyra remained crouched over Ryan, her shield finally failing as the last of her armor's power reserves depleted. You know who I am, Ryan said weakly. Yes, Your Highness. Don't call me that, he winced. I haven't been a prince since I was 12. I'm Ryan now. You've always been Ryanon, she replied softly. You just forgot, as we all did. Inside the ship, Lyra helped Ryan to the cockpit and strapped him into the co-pilot's seat. She took the pilot's position, powering up the age systems. You can fly this? Ryan asked, surprised. Elite guard training includes all transport classes, she replied. Plus, my father was a cargo pilot before the uprising. The engines coughed to life. Lyra bypassed the docking clamps manually, and the ship shuddered as it broke free from its moorings. Where to? She asked, guiding the ship away from the platform. Sanctuary Moon. Coordinates in my left inner pocket. It's where the children are. The orphanage. As they accelerated away, Ryan's strength ebbed. Lyra engaged the autopilot and moved to check his condition. Stay with me, she urged, applying pressure to his chest wound. If I don't make it, he whispered, the Union will follow you. Tell them I found you. They'll understand. Found me? Lyra questioned. Ryan's bloodied hand reached up to touch her face. Not just any elite guard could have been at that platform today. The armor. It recognized you, too. Check your own scanner. Lyra accessed her armor's diagnostic system. There, beneath the damage reports, genetic analysis complete, Royal Guardian lineage confirmed. Bloodline, protector caste, House Terrace. House Terrace, Ryan confirmed, seeing the recognition in her eyes. Your family served mine for generations. It wasn't coincidence that brought us together. It was destiny. 3 days later in the medical facility on Sanctuary Moon, Lyra sat beside Ryan's bed. Her armor had been removed, revealing the woman beneath. The orphans Ryan had fought so hard to protect were safe, unaware that their benefactor was royalty. The medical bay was quiet, the only sounds the soft beeping of monitoring equipment and the distant laughter of children from another wing. Ryan slept, his breathing deep and even, his face peaceful for the first time since she'd met him. Lyra leaned forward, studying his features. Without the constant struggle for survival, she could see the resemblance to the royal portraits she'd grown up with. The strong jawline of his father, the expressive eyes of his mother. Almost without conscious thought, her fingers reached out to touch the birthmark at the base of his neck, the double star that had changed everything. As her fingers made contact, his eyes opened. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. No longer guard and smuggler, but guardian and ward, roles as ancient as their bloodlines. Outside the window, the gas giant rose over Sanctuary Moon's horizon, its swirling storms reminiscent of her armor's coloration. Storm sky blue, the traditional color of the Royal Guardians. Ryan's hand moved to cover hers, still resting near the birthmark on his neck. His touch was warm, human, a connection that transcended duty. What happens now? She asked quietly. His lips curved in a smile that held both weariness and determination. He glanced at his healing wound, then at her hand on his birthmark. Now we wear each other's stains. Together. Lyra nodded, feeling for the first time in years that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The stain that had started everything, that small smear of biogel on her perfect armor, had led her home.